On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's time for the January 17th, 2022 episode, What the Ship, the top 5 stories in the maritime sector. Hi, I'm your host, Sam Mercogliano, coming to you live from beautiful North Carolina, which just got hit by a snow and ice storm, which I have to tell you, when frozen precipitation falls from the sky in North Carolina, it's not good. It's not good. Hence, no episode over this weekend. We had power outages, and I run like a dozen fire calls in my local fire department. So anyway, we're back to hit the top 5 stories this week in the maritime sector. And I think I got a host of good ones for you. But before we jump into there, I want to recap what we have covered this past week. So obviously last Monday, we had our episode of What the Ship, the second one for 2022. One of the big things about that episode that I'm really kind of proud of right now is we've put it up as a podcast. We will put What the Ship up as a podcast maybe a day or two after we have broadcast What the Ship on YouTube so that you can download it and listen to it later on. We also did a couple of other episodes. We did a special episode on Dream Cruise Lines and MV Werften declaring bankruptcy. Covered that big issue going on in Germany and obviously in Hong Kong with the demise of Dream Cruise Lines. Interesting to note, we didn't get a chance to talk about it at the time, but China has just launched its first purpose-built passenger liner, and it'll be interesting to see if this is related to this. Obviously, Dream Cruise, based in Hong Kong, owned by a Malaysian millionaire, and now with the collapse of the MV shipyard, we're going to see the potential for China taking a greater role in the construction and operation of cruise ships. We also talked about the attacks on the supply line, specifically what I called pirate attacks against the supply chain. This was attacks on the Union Pacific rail lines in Southern California. And then we talked about Secretary Pete's trip to LA and Long Beach and how everything is not well. We'll have links to all these videos in the show notes. All right, with that, let's jump to story number 1. This story came out Friday by Lorianne Larocco, and it was posted over at American Shipper on FreightWaves. Container Exchange warns of ripple effect of disruptions, one after the other. So I could have given you a whole batch of stories about impacts of COVID and shutdowns around the area, but this story right here really encapsulates it and talks about this ripple effect. If you remember back to 2020 and into 2021, this was the issue we were seeing. We weren't seeing one specific issue. We did with COVID, but then we saw a series of smaller issues. And one of the things you're seeing right here, and they put together this chart here, the average median time containers spent in depot in China in 2021 by ports in days. And one of the things you're seeing there are impacts of some of these beginning to see shutdowns. And we're seeing that. We had a other story where we talked about the day-to-day from end to end, how long it took for containers to be delivered. And it's about 80 days from China to the United States. And now we're seeing right here in Shenzhen over 20 days where containers are spending in depots. And then this chart right here, average median time containers spent in depot worldwide. You can see in the United Kingdom, 51 days, in the United States, 50 days, South Africa, 47, UAE, 40, Pakistan, 31, Germany, which is Hamburg, 25, India, 22, Uganda, Japan, Belgium, all countries are suffering from this. And this means that containers are sitting. Now, understand, even though some of these ports are on the end of the delivery phase, the longer containers sit there, the longer it takes to turn around and get back in, and that means less availability of containers. That's why there's a big push to move export containers, those big empty containers sitting in yards in the United States, out and get them back across. And then this story right here kind of builds on it. Imports take dramatically longer to reach US as bottlenecks bite. And again, this is that indication of that across several metrics. There's the Flexport Trans-Pacific Eastbound OTI, which measures how many days it takes to get across the Pacific. And again, we're not looking at one metric here. We're looking at multiple metrics here. You got the Freightos, China to US shipment transit time. We see that increasing. And then the Schiffel, which is the China US ocean transit time, also increasing. Again, one may be an indicator, but when you start seeing multiple, and here's the sea intelligence, again, All this is indicating that it's taking longer for containers to move across. And then even when they're arriving where they need to be, the containers are sitting longer. That means the entire system is slowing down. And that is not a good indication for movement. We expect to see a slowdown in container shipments, usually in Q1, right around March tends to be the slowest. However, this year with Chinese New Year being so far forward, it's February 1st, and the massive backlog we're seeing, it's going to be difficult to see whether or not we get out from under this in any short period of time. So that is story number one. So story number two builds on stories that I have done in the past on Home Depot, on IKEA, on Amazon, you name it. Did a whole slew of these videos. They're in our video library at YouTube at what's going on with shipping. But right here, we're seeing this story. FedEx charters vessels to move China exports rail containers. So I got a buddy who's over in the Far East and sent me some images of them loading FedEx 53-foot containers into a bulk vessel. So one of the great things about what's going on with shipping and all my subscribers and viewers is a great network of intelligence I have on ships and ship movement. So when my buddy in the Far East sat there and said, hey, I'm loading a ship with FedEx containers and heading to the United States, I was able to go, is it the Genco Pyrenees? And he asked me how I knew that. And I said, well, I got good viewers, and that's thanks to you. Genco Pyrenees right now out of China. We see it heading across. It's heading across to Port Hueneme, which is the Navy base just north of LA and Long Beach in Ventura County. It's also a commercial facility. We saw that the U.S. Navy is allowing the expanded use of Port Hueneme. And one of the things we're seeing is this expanded use of different ports. She is going to be offloading. And again, she is a self-sustaining container ship. So she's actually a bulk carrier. And you can see right here from her image that she's got her own cranes. And so she'll be able to move off there and offload. And that's really the key thing. Bulk containers, and especially smaller bulk vessels right now, are in excess, not being used a lot, so that these ships can be loaded with containers, lashed down within the holds, and then use the ship cranes to get them off. According to this story, again, what we're seeing here is, and this is by Eric over at FreightWaves, he doesn't identify the vessel, but he sits here and says that FedEx Logistics is renting dedicated vessels so it could transport 53-foot containers manufactured in China that will inject into the FedEx Freight intermodal network in Southern California. The freight forwarding company is taking advantage of the project to load the containers with electronics, automotive components, garments, and department store merchandise for small, medium, and large customers. The first vessel with a capacity of 353-foot containers departed Port Hueneme in China on January 4th, scheduled to arrive at the Port Hueneme by the end of the month. And that coincides exactly with Genco Pyrenees coming in. The FedEx vessels will use the terminal at Navy Base Ventura County under a pre-existing arrangement between the Navy and Port Hueneme. So one of the things we're seeing is the alternative use of ports, and these are non-traditional container ports. We also got a story this week too, which is really good, because I mentioned this the other week about the Port of Boston not being used. And now Evergreen has sent in the Ever Fortune coming in, largest ship to come into Boston at this point, going to be able to use that new container facility there and offload. That's great news for them to be able to use that facility. And one of the things I think we really need to see incentivized here is the use of ports other than the four big ones: LA, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, Savannah, and Houston. So that is story number two. Story number three takes us back to one of our old favorites, the Suez Canal. What's going on in the Suez Canal today? Well, what's going on in the Suez Canal is the Suez Canal has had its record year. Even with Ever Given closing the canal for 6 days. And there she is. That's her famous image of her leaving the Great Bitter Lake there, heading northbound at the time. Ever Given closed the canal for 6 days. Yet one of the things we see, according to reports, this is a Bloomberg report coming out, that even despite that, they generated $6.3 billion in revenue this year, 20,694 ships through 2021. Usually the canal has been averaging about 18,000 vessels going through it. roughly around $5 billion. This year, they're up there a little bit higher. I wonder how much of that money is generated from the holding of the Ever Given. But we see the Suez Canal is definitely back up to where it wants to be, although it wants to be much higher. It actually wants to be generating about $9 billion and moving even more vessels through it. The other aspect here is an expansion program that we talked about earlier. The Suez Canal plans for the expansion of the canal to be completed by July of 2023. And this is not unusual. Let me be clear. When the last time they did the expansion, it was well ahead of schedule. It took about a year to do it. This expansion is going to widen sections of the Suez Canal, particularly where Ever Given got stuck. And we're going to see the improvement. It says right here, this will improve ship navigation by 28% in the difficult part of the canal. Specifically, the southern 30 kilometers of the canal will be widened 40 meters eastward and deepened to 72 feet from 66 feet. What I have yet to see yet, and I am not sure that the Suez Canal will do this yet, is set new limits, new Suez Canal max limits, Suez max limits on vessels. Right now, there's maximum draft, maximum width, maximum length vessels that can go through the canal. With this increase, larger ships can go through the canal. If the Suez doesn't set the limits, shipbuilders, companies will build bigger vessels. And if you build it, they will come, to quote a Kevin Costner movie from a long time ago. This is going to happen, and the Field of Dreams will happen here in the Suez Canal unless they set those limits. And the Suez has got to remember that just because you build it bigger, wider, if you don't set the limits, you can have another Ever Given incident that could substantially be worse. That's story number 3. Story number 4 is the Federal Maritime Commission issued its final report on COVID-19's impact on the cruise industry. Commissioner Sola has been overseeing fact-finding number 29. Fact-finding number 30. Fact-finding number 29 is the delays in the container. Fact-finding 30 has been on the cruise ship industry. And this goes back to March of 2020 when the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, issued basically halts on the cruise industry. We've seen that going on, and we've had multiple stories here on What the Ship, talking about the impact this has had on the cruise ship industry with Omicron right now. Basically, what they wanted to do is really highlight what the importance of the cruise sector has been. And one of the things that Sola has done is he issued 6 separate reports examining economic impacts to specific states and regions, showing that the cruise industry accounts for 436,000 jobs throughout the United States, generating over $25 billion in direct spending nationwide. He says specifically in this, the passenger ship industry is a vital economic engine for ports and cities across the United States and is an important source of jobs for Americans from all walks of life. Shutting down ships for an intermediate amount of time had a negative impact on the people who rely on cruise ships for income or on the ports and communities that benefit from vessel calls. Determining what needed to be accomplished to allow ships to sail and minimize risk to passengers and crew was a priority for the fact-finding from its first day. He goes on here to talk a little bit more about it, including the issue about the Alaska Tourism Restoration Act, which temporarily suspended the Passenger Vessel Service Act of 1886, which allowed vessels to go from the United States to Alaska without stopping at a foreign port, principally Canada, because Canada has prohibited passenger vessels coming in. This links to the summary and the final report, which I'll have on here. The only thing I'll mention about this, and I've read through the report and I looked at it, again, is number one, it's a no-brainer to me. Of course, this impacts the United States when you stop cruise ships coming in, ports, terminals, everything. One of the things that I find very interesting about the report is, again, it doesn't really highlight how much these corporations, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, are based in the United States, but incorporated overseas, Panama, the Bahamas, Liberia. Their ships are registered overseas, Panama, Liberia, the Bahamas, and how much of that is outside U.S. economic control or taxes or anything along those lines. And I thought this was a great opportunity here to really talk about what can be done to create element that could bring those ships back under U.S. control. For example, a specific U.S. registry, perhaps a passenger ship registry, that brings those vessels within U.S. registry, requires the officers and operating crew, the deck and engine specifically, which are a small amount of the overall crew, to be American officered, to require U.S. merchant marine documents, to put them under a unique registry, very much similar to an international registry is done in Norway or Denmark or Portugal, for example, or Great Britain is talking about creating. I think there was a great opportunity here to talk about that, and I feel like it missed that opportunity here to do it. We know the industry generates a lot of money. Everybody knows that. I'm not exactly sure why we needed a report to do that, but here you go. If you want to read it, here are the links to it. That's story number 4. Story number 5 involved an earth-shattering kaboom, and that was the underwater volcanic eruption off the island of Tonga just a few days ago. Wow. I mean, the satellite imageries of this are absolutely incredible and amazing. I mean, these are just some of the images you see right here. And it looks like, again, the Bikini Atoll blast done in 1946, when they detonated atomic bombs there to determine the impact on vessels. It's just an absolutely incredible feat. And of course, there are multiple videos here of the effect in Tonga, an island that is reeling from this, obviously. And if you can help, and we'll include information here in the video, in the show notes, where you can send relief help to the island of Tonga. One of the interesting questions I got asked a lot was the impact it had on global shipping. And this is a story here that was done by Reuters on GCAP that talks about why the eruption was so violent and the impact it had. And one of the things that I think is really important to understand here with the eruption is obviously, if you're within the scale of the eruption, it's going to have catastrophic impact. But why the tsunami doesn't affect ships? Now, understand, out in the deep water, you will never even see a tsunami. You will never see it, because one of the things that makes a tsunami is pushing water across from the blast area. And where it becomes an impact is when the bottom of the ocean comes up. So it's really only in the coastal areas. So when you see that water coming ashore in Tonga, and even on the west coast of the United States, going up rivers and in marinas, for example, that impact is only felt close to the coast. When you're out in the ocean, you would never, you may see just a light ripple, and if anything, I doubt it. You'll never feel that. Now, when you talk about like rogue waves, for example, that's different. That is usually during storms, when waves all of a sudden build into heights well beyond what is normal out there. But with a tsunami effect, and although there are images, for example, there was a tsunami effect off the coast of Japan not too long ago, where a Japanese Coast Guard vessel had to ride out the tsunami. That was close to shore. Out in the ocean, you would never feel it. You would feel the resonance through the hull of the blast, because, again, sound travels through ocean like crazy. I would hate to have been in a submarine out in the middle of the Pacific, and especially if you're on the sonars, because that earth-shattering kaboom had to be just amazing to hear. It reverberated around the planet. Understand, they were repercussion effects that literally went around the planet and came back. It is an amazing impact. But in terms of global shipping, it really doesn't have a massive impact, unless it happened so that it was going to hit the anchorages off LA and Long Beach in San Pedro, not San Pedro, as I'm always being told, San Pedro. You would not really see it. Again, that impact was resonating more northwards, and because of the shape of this island, and the blast didn't go out as a concentric circle, it actually went out in different ways, and the impact was felt in different areas. But disruptions like this could cause, if this happens close to shore, you could see impacts when it comes to shipping. So a really amazing story. Just my heart goes out for the people of Tonga about this blast. And again, I'll have information in the show notes so you can relate to it. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. We covered a lot here today, but again, a lot of good information out there for you to follow. Again, follow me, subscribe to the channel, hit the bells to be alerted about new videos when they come out. Leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, contribute to the Patreon page. It allows me to have the time to put these videos together and perhaps get a backup generator so I have power in the house so I can do my weekend videos. But more importantly, subscribe, follow. That allows me to get this out. And be sure to check out the podcast. Again, I will have this episode up probably on Wednesday for the podcast. It'll be up today on Monday for everybody else on YouTube. And until our next episode, this is Sal signing off.